Number 5. Roy Sullivan, a U.S. park ranger at Shenandoah National Park, survived being struck by lightning 7 times between 1942 and 1977. This has earned him the Guinness World Record for the most lightning strikes survived by a single person. The first time was in 1942, when he was on duty at a fire lookout tower during a storm. Lightning struck the tower and set it on fire. When Sullivan tried to escape, the lightning struck him, leaving a long scar down his right leg and a hole in the toe of the shoe. In 1969, 27 years after the first strike, Sullivan was driving a truck on a mountain road when lightning struck a tree on side of the road and bounced into his open truck window. The lightning burned off his eyebrows, eyelashes, and set his hair on fire. The third strike occurred in 1970, when Sullivan was in his front yard. The lightning hit a nearby power transformer and jumped to his left shoulder, causing burns. In 1972, while working inside a ranger station, he was struck by lightning again. This bolt set his hair on fire once more, and he extinguished the flames by wrapping his head in a wet towel. The next strike was in 1973, while he was patrolling the park. He saw a storm cloud forming and decided to drive away quickly. But the cloud seemed to follow him. When he thought he had outrun it and got out of his truck, he was struck by lightning. 3 years later in 1976, he was struck for the 6th time while walking along a trail, injuring his ankle. The final time was in 1977, while he was fishing. Lightning struck the top of his head, setting his hair on fire and burning his chest and stomach. The odds of a person being struck by lightning in their lifetime are about 1 in 10,000. Sullivan was struck 7 times, making his odds 1 in 10 octillion. Absolutely insane. Number 4. In the early morning of May 26, 2013, the tugboat Jackson 4 capsized due to a large wave, 20 miles off the coast of Nigeria. Everyone on board panicked, trying to escape, except for Chef Harrison Okene, who was trapped in the bathroom because he had woken up earlier to use the toilet. Fortunately, when the boat capsized and quickly sank to the bottom of the sea at a depth of nearly 100 feet, it created an air pocket that allowed Harrison to hold on to the sink and keep his head above the water to breathe. At that moment, he was completely disoriented and alone in the dark. He gathered the courage to swim and feel his way to the engineer's office, where he found another, larger air pocket, about 4 feet high. He then found a mattress and other items to remove the wall paneling, creating a platform to sit on that allowed his upper body to stay above the water, preventing hypothermia. Luckily, he also found a can of Coca-Cola to sip on as he fought to stay alive for the next 60 hours. Rescue teams were deployed to retrieve the bodies, not expecting anyone to be alive. They used a remotely operated underwater vehicle to locate the sunken boat, and divers began their inspection. As soon as Harrison saw the lights, he tapped on the side of the ship to get their attention. When the divers swam closer, Harrison grabbed him and was rescued. From the diving bell, Harrison was transferred to a decompression chamber where he stayed for an additional 2.5 days as his body adjusted to surface pressure. To this day, Harrison is the only person in the world to survive underwater for 3 days. Number 3. On Christmas Eve in 1971, Juliane Koepcke, a 17-year-old girl, boarded LANSA Flight 5008 with her mother, traveling from Lima to Pucallpa, Peru. Unfortunately, the plane was struck by lightning as it flew into a storm. Juliane, still strapped to her seat, fell from a height of about 10,000 feet into the Amazon rainforest. Miraculously, Juliane survived the fall with a broken collarbone, a deep gash on her arm, a swollen eye, and many other cuts and bruises. The thick canopy of the rainforest likely saved her life. Waking up after the fall, she groggily looked around for her mother but couldn't find her. Hungry, thirsty, and in pain, Juliane knew that waiting for rescue might mean death. She struggled to her feet and began walking. She drank rainwater that had collected on leaves and found a small bag of candy to eat. Her parents were zoologists, and from a young age, she had accompanied them into the jungle, learning many survival skills. She carefully moved by tossing her shoe ahead of her to avoid dangerous camouflaged animals. Knowing that water is vital for survival and could lead to human civilization, she followed a small stream. For days, Juliane was attacked by insects, especially mosquitoes and flies. Flies laid eggs in the wound on her arm, making it worse. By the 5th or 6th day, Juliane finally reached the bank of a large river but still hadn't found any people. A few days earlier, she had eaten her last piece of candy. Now, she drank river water to keep her stomach full. On the 10th day, weak and delirious, Juliane stumbled upon a logging hut. She found some gasoline there and poured it over her wound to remove the maggots that had infested her arm. Exhausted, she fell asleep in the hut. When the loggers returned, they found her, treated her wounds, and brought her to a populated area. Eventually, she was taken to Koepcke Hospital for further treatment. Number 2. In April 2003, Aron Ralston, an experienced hiker, set out on a solo adventure to explore Blue John Canyon in Utah's Canyonlands National Park. What seemed like an ordinary trip quickly turned into a nightmare. While trying to descend a narrow canyon, a 800-pound boulder dislodged and pinned his right arm against the canyon wall. He was trapped miles away from help, with no cell service, and hadn't told anyone where he was going. What would you do in such a situation? At first, Ralston tried every possible way to free himself, using his climbing gear, ropes, and a small multi-tool he had. He attempted to chip away at the boulder, set up a pulley system to try and lift it, and even tried to sever his own arm. But the tool wasn't sharp enough to cut through bone, so none of his efforts succeeded. He started to fear for his life. He had only packed a small amount of food, 2 burritos, and a 350-milliliter bottle of water. Ralston rationed his limited supplies while trying to free himself. By the 3rd day, however, his food and water were gone, and the boulder hadn't budged. Under the harsh desert sun, he resorted to drinking his own urine to stay hydrated. After multiple failed attempts to escape, Ralston grew desperate and believed he would die there. He used his video camera to record his final moments and say goodbye to his family. In his weakened state, he began hallucinating, seeing visions of himself playing with a child with only one arm. He woke up with the intention of cutting off his arm again. He started by tying a tourniquet around his arm and then broke the bones in his forearm by using his body weight to lever against the boulder. Enduring excruciating pain, he used his knife to cut through the muscle, tendons, and nerves. The entire process took about an hour, but he finally freed himself. Weak and delirious, Ralston rappelled down a 65-foot cliff using just one arm and began hiking out of the canyon. He managed to walk about 6 miles before he was discovered by a family of hikers who alerted emergency services. A rescue helicopter arrived shortly after, and Ralston was airlifted to a hospital, where he underwent surgery and survived. His story has inspired many people and was later adapted into the film 127 Hours. Number 1. On November 17, 2012, José Salvador Alvarenga set sail from the fishing village of Costa Azul near Pijijiapan, off the coast of Chiapas, Mexico. As an experienced sailor and fisherman, he intended to go shark fishing for 30 hours. Accompanying him on the small boat was 23-year-old Ezequiel Córdoba. Unfortunately, a massive storm hit, destroying the boat's engine and electronics, causing them to lose all the fish they had caught, and leaving the 2 men drifting aimlessly on the vast ocean with no way to contact land. In the early days, they tried to catch fish with their bare hands and collected rainwater in plastic bottles to drink. Later, they learned to scavenge food from any source that appeared. Alvarenga caught fish, turtles, jellyfish, and seabirds with his bare hands, and sometimes they even scooped up bits of food and floating plastic debris from the water. They gathered drinking water from rain whenever possible, but more often were forced to drink their own urine. After about 4 months, Córdoba became ill and died because he refused to eat the raw food like birds and turtles, leaving Alvarenga alone to continue the fight for survival. His journey took him across the Pacific Ocean, drifting over 6,000 miles as he wandered aimlessly for more than a year. In the final 5 days of his ordeal, Alvarenga drifted near the Marshall Islands. Though he was severely malnourished, he focused all his remaining strength on paddling and swimming the final stretch toward land. He stumbled upon a house on the beach, where a local couple found and helped him. He was taken to Majuro, the capital of the Marshall Islands, where he was treated for severe dehydration and malnutrition. He survived and became the longest known case of someone lost at sea.